Today we are going to discuss about monetization, market regulation and Indian Ocean trade during Delhi Sultanate, which will cover 13th, 14th and 15th century. Now, with the advent of Delhi Sultanate, monetization or the use of money in India changed and the quality of money also improved. Now, initially during the Ghaznavid period, Hindu Shahi coins were abundantly used in areas of Kabul and Lahore, and these coins moved up to Rajasthan. And incidentally, these coins were also used in the central part of North India. But with Iltutmish, standardization reached a new height. Now, of course, one has to understand that supply of silver and gold, the metal silver and gold, always came from outside. So, money, the use of money and manufacturing of money is dependent on this supply. Now, standardization of Iltutmish reduced the amount of silver in these coins. So much so that the ratio of copper to silver, or rather silver to copper, was 1:80. Now, if we come to the value of silver coins with that of copper, one can say that it was 1:48. Copper coins were called jittals and silver coins were known as tankas. Now, after the control of Devagiri by Delhi Sultanate, this value was around 1:50. But of course, in North India, it remained 1:48. Now, as the empire expanded, the control of silver and gold came into the hands of Delhi Sultanate, and they were able to change these hoarded silver and gold into, or rather the reserves, into coins. So, there was a supply of more and more coins into the market. Now, this supply of coins definitely gave an impetus to trade and commerce. Now, after Alauddin Khalji, what we see is there was an attempt by Muhammad bin Tughlaq to introduce token currency. Though this concept of token currency came from China, it was not successful. But if it was successful, then it could have combated the scarcity of the supply of silver and gold. But it was unfortunately not successful. Now, during Alauddin Khalji's time, we see a surplus of silver coins being minted, so much so that it was also used during the Tughlaq period. And it is noted that when Timur came to India, he saw the use of silver coins that was issued by Alauddin Khalji. During Firoz Tughlaq, remember that there was a huge scarcity of silver coins and of course gold coins. And silver and gold coins at a point of time became commemorative. Now, compared to 13th century, 14th century, there was definitely a scarcity of coins because of the scarcity of the supply of silver and gold. Now, in 15th century, we see Kashmir sultans issuing gold coins which were commemorative. Now, in the same 15th century, we see the sultans of Jaunpur, Gujarat, issuing silver coins which were again commemorative. We also hear about the smaller denominations like dirham in the market. But this standardization definitely gave an edge to trade and commerce. Areas like Bengal used cowries because of the availability of it. Like one hears about Bengal's trade with Maldives in cowries. There was an absence of use of coin here. Now let us move on from this monetization, this picture of monetization, into market control. Now, or market regulation. Now, the subsistence cost was low during this period. And there was an attempt by Alauddin Khalji to control the manufacturing products. Now, this somehow made the wages low. The contemporary socialist like Ziauddin Barani gave us an idea that Alauddin Khalji strictly regulated the market regulation, the market. Now, one has to understand that it is very difficult to control the whole of the empire or even the peripheral area of the empire. One can say definitely that this market regulation was prevalent in areas from say Lahore to Chain in south and Katihar in the east. But apart from this, in the peripheral areas, definitely market regulation was not controlled. And of course, this market regulation was initially done because of the armed forces. It's facilitated the lives of the armed forces in the canton areas. Now let us from here move on to Indian Ocean trade. Now, Indian Ocean trade, you have to understand that during this period, that is 13th, 14th and 15th century, was in a process of continuity, and we also saw a huge change in the trade. This change was in the technology of the shipbuilding. The changes occurred in the consumption pattern of the consumers, the nature of the traders, and the bulk of the trade. Now, Indian Ocean trade definitely has to be seen from the point that it was continuity of the past, because the process of trade did not stop before 13th century. Now, what happened in the 13th century, that we see that in the whole of Asia, there was an attempt to bring about a kind of a political stability. Now, this political stability again initiated a stability in the maritime activity, and India played definitely a very, very important part. Now, we are going to now move on to the components of these activities. Now, first of all is all the major sources talk about how India became the consumer of the world gold. Now, this has been seen from time immemorial that India hoarded gold, the international gold, in lieu of its products. Now, this has been reported by, let's say, Persian historians like Wasaf, then geographers like Alumari, and even till the 17th century traveler Bernier reported of this. Now, let us come now to the fact as to how trade was conducted, in what trade was conducted. Interestingly, the trade of the Indian Ocean depended largely on the monsoon winds. Now, monsoon winds, if you take India's strategical position, changed in its east and in the west coasts, that is Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. Now, because of this, we see there that from 1175 onwards, transshipment became a key feature of this trade, and this transshipment took place in India. Now, a particular kind of a vessel called dhow brought goods in India from the west. Now, these goods were then moved to another vessel called the Chinese junk, and then this junk took the goods towards China.
What was the difference between this junk and the dhow vessels?
If you see historically, junk was definitely a technology that came into being. The time particularly is not known, but it is Chinese made. And junk compared to dhow is larger. But dhow was more equipped to move in the wind conditions that is west of India, that is in the Arabian Sea and way up to Persian Gulf. But Chinese junk was more equipped to move in the monsoon condition or the monsoon winds in the eastern part of India. So therefore you can understand how important India's strategical position was. So therefore the goods which were brought from Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean in dhow changed it changed the vessels, and then it moved upward to China. So this roughly continued till the advent of the Europeans. And one also has to understand that China played a very, very important role. The Chinese market and the trade that centered around China was much larger compared to Europe, particularly of the period that we are talking. Now let us move on to the goods that were there in the trade. Now, first of all, let us see as to what was in demand in the Chinese market, or China per se. Now, China had a huge demand for spices. One has to understand that the spices that were produced in China, that is cinnamon or ginger, those were exported by China. China, on the contrary, had a huge demand for pepper, and this pepper went from the Malabar coast of India to China. Though there was pepper produced in Indonesia and in certain parts of Ceylon, but definitely Malabar pepper was in high demand in the Chinese market. In the writings of Marco Polo, what we see is Marco Polo admits that the demand of pepper in Chinese market was much higher than the demands of pepper in Europe. So you can understand the amount of consumption that this Chinese market had. Apart from that, cotton cloth was in high demand in China. Now, it is so noted that the Chinese silk was less expensive compared to the cotton that went from Bengal. Traditionally, the areas of Coromandel, Bengal and Gujarat were the exporters of cotton cloth to China. There are sources which says that Chinese silk was comparatively less expensive than Indian cotton that was available in the Chinese market. Now, in the Chinese market, Deccani diamond was also in high demand because it was very hard stone and it could scratch the pearls and even the less expensive stones that were available, or rather that were imported into China. Now, China, on the other hand, exported huge amount of porcelain and silk. Now, silk that they exported was rewoven in many parts of the world, especially in India. Chinese brocade was very expensive and had a high demand not only in India but also in Europe. Now, India had a huge demand for luxury goods and spices that was not produced in India. Now, in the luxury goods, interestingly, apart from perfumes or very expensive clothes, you have flora and fauna, which included like zebra, giraffe from Africa, certain birds, and also African baobab as a plant. Now, from here, if we can see as to what were the goods that was in demand in Cairo. Now, India and Cairo had a very long traditional relationship. In Cairo, interestingly, Indian cloth did not have much of a market. Instead, iron and steel, which was considered to have a high quality, was in demand. And staple food was in demand in parts of South Arabia, Persian Gulf, and in certain parts of North Africa and East Africa. Now, teak especially from the Malabar teak or the teaks of the rainforest of India, was in high demand in the teakless or rather the treeless areas of Arabia and Persian Gulf. So therefore one can say that long route trade was there, and there were shorter route trades of, let's say, between India and Maldives or China and Indonesia. These were the smaller route trades along with the long routes which took, say, let's say, which started from China and it ended up in Arabia. If we move on from here to see as to what were the upcoming areas in the Indian Ocean trade, one was Indonesia. Now, Indonesia during this period was going through a political change. The Srivijaya culture or the Srivijaya influence of Indonesia was subsiding and Islamization was becoming important. Now, remember that the Muslim merchants in the Indian Ocean trade who flocked to many areas of China, India, Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, had a tremendous role to play in this Islamization. Now again, if you look into the involvement of the Indian merchants, you know that during the ancient period in Southeast Asia, Hindu and Buddhist influence was very strong in Southeast Asian empires. Now this cultural milieu gave an edge or gave an impetus to the Indian traders' involvement in these areas. So therefore, what we see is traders were area specific, but they had huge amount of mobility. So then you can always notice that areas of Canton or Zhejiang in China had traders from Arabia or Persia or let's say India, or Chinese traders moving up to Persian Gulf, Arabian Sea. So this was a noted feature in the Indian Ocean trade. But one thing about these traders that were there in the Chinese market, one can say that Chinese trade was always in the hands of the foreigners or the foreign traders, because somehow these traders were not Chinese in culture. Now in Zhejiang, suppose the traders were subjects of the state, but somehow they were not part of the Confucian bureaucracy. So the traders maintained their own identity. But in case of India, somehow the traders over the years had familiarized themselves with the land. So all these things were happening. Now these kind of cultural changes were happening during the period of our discussion. Now let us now move on to how these trade operated, because you have to remember that Indian Ocean was always popular for piracy. Now ships were always armed. In this case, you have a huge role was played by the African slaves. Now, African slaves were a commodity that came from Africa, and they served the Chinese and the Indian courts and courts in and around Asia. But apart from that, they were the armed men who guarded the ships. Now, this has been noted by travelers, geographers, and historians. Now, they were very popular, so much so that Amir Khusro, a poet of the 13th century, as you know, he could distinguish between an Habshi and a Zinzi slave. So therefore, one can understand that these slaves had different market prices and they were in high demand during this period. Another very important commodity that was consumed by the Indians was the war horses of mid-Asia. Now, we hear about the Pandyan kingdom, which was in the interior of South India during the medieval times, which had a huge demand for Iraqi horses. Now, horses were bred all over South Arabia and in the Persian Gulf, and it was a prized item which moved to India. Now, a huge revenue was involved in this, and until the advent of the Europeans, of course, war horses was the very important commodity between Arabia, or let's say Persian Gulf in Arabia, and India in this Indian Ocean market. Now, India alone consumed almost 80% of the war horses which moved from this area to the east. So one has to understand that these are the commodities over which the Indian Ocean market thrived. The traders, definitely maintaining their identity, was able to control this area or this trade. And before the advent of the Europeans, now this was the condition in which Indian Ocean trade prevailed.
Ma'am, you talked about slaves being exported to India. Now, did these slaves have any particular role to play in Indian politics?
We hear about in the 13th century, 13th, 14th century, these slaves playing a very important role in the center. That is, you know about Razia and her connection with an Abyssinian slave. In Jaunpur, we hear about a slave, a Habshi slave, becoming a political head. Therefore, one has to understand that once the slaves were brought here, they were absorbed in the political scenario for different purposes. They automatically gained power and became important. So, you have to understand that these slaves, some of them were trained slaves. They were trained in arms and ammunitions. So, automatically they will gain power and they will gain political power. Therefore, that is very important to note. Especially the Habshi slaves, they were very popular for their political role in Asian politics. So let us come to the conclusion of this lecture, that you have to understand that 13th, 14th, 15th century, an economic change was ushered with the advent of the Delhi Sultanate. Standardization of money changed, the use of money became more and more, and trade and commerce flourished. Now, Indian Ocean trade, on the other hand, flourished not only in the hands of the Delhi Sultanate, but throughout Asia. The political stability brought about a huge change in the nature of Indian Ocean trade, which influenced the next centuries in long. Till the advent of the Europeans, definitely trade was in the hands of the Asians, and the merchants maintained their own identity. Certain commodities became very popular and was in high demand, and definitely a lot of technological changes ushered in the making of the shipbuilding process.